Lucky me. No more child support, let's get a divorce. What? While preparing for a funeral, I was shocked by the sudden statement from him. I knew he was selfish, but this was beyond anything I expected. There's a woman I want to marry. But she doesn't want kids. So what? As long as Ken was alive, I was drained by child support and medical bills, right?
Ah.
I'm relieved. How awful. I felt a chill run through me. To think this man was Ken's father. My mind was clear, but my insides were boiling. I agree to the divorce. Right? I'll take the house, so get out fast. Just wait until after the funeral. Fine. With that, he left somewhere. On the day of the funeral, I read Ken's will. Sean turned pale, and the relatives glared at him like demons. Now is the time to fight back. My name is Monica. A 42-year-old housewife. I used to work as a translator in a company, but now I've changed jobs and am working freelance. My husband, Sean, is 45 years old, 3 years my senior. I married him when I was 29. He was the account manager for one of our company's clients. The following year, our son Ken was born. But Sean was incredibly selfish and hardly participated in child rearing. Ken was very frail, constantly in and out of the hospital from birth. I often felt guilty for not being able to give him a stronger body. But he bravely faced his treatments, managing to hold on for 12 years. His condition worsened during the rainy season when he was 12. His cough wouldn't stop, his body wouldn't accept food, and his fever wouldn't go down. We rushed him to the hospital for treatment, but his symptoms hardly improved. Sorry, Mom, for having to be hospitalized again. You don't need to apologize for that. You'll get better, okay? Yes, I'll try my best. He said this with a frail smile. My eyes welled up with tears, but I couldn't cry in front of him. I had to hold back my tears. While he finally fell asleep for a bit, I called Sean. But no matter how many times I tried, the call wouldn't connect. Maybe he was at a client's office, I thought, and switched to leaving a message. I got a reply from him the next morning. I immediately called him back, and this time he picked up right away. What's up, calling me so early? It's not a what's up. Why aren't you here? He is fighting hard. Even if I go there, it's not like his illness will magically get better. Besides, the hospital costs, they're piling up, right? The bed isn't free, tell the doctors to discharge him as soon as possible. What? How can you say such a thing?
Ah.
Can't hear you. Anyway, I'm off to work. Wait a minute. But he didn't listen and hung up the phone abruptly. It was true that he had always been somewhat disinterested in Ken. But he had never been this cruel before. I gripped my smartphone, trembling with anger. Even as the rainy season ended and summer began, his condition did not improve. The doctors said he might not see the winter. So I reduced my workload to spend as much time as possible by Ken's side. Mom, you've been with me from morning until evening lately, but is your work okay? It's okay. I'm managing everything at home, so don't worry. If you say so. His voice sounded unconvinced, and he looked troubled. Being the kind soul he is. He was probably worried that my work was suffering or that he was being a burden. After that conversation, to avoid causing him any more stress, I started bringing my laptop and worked in front of him. He loved reading and spent much of his day with books. He also enjoyed studying and would participate in the hospital's school program when he felt well. I wanted to allow him to do anything he wished. But Sean seemed very dissatisfied with this approach. He not only avoided visiting Ken but also constantly complained at home. Is he still not discharged? He's in a private room, right? What a waste of money for the bed. How can you say that when your son is fighting so hard? Why don't you visit him for once? I'm busy. I don't need to go as long as you visit him. He never changed his attitude and refused to visit him. Having such a man as a father, Ken must have been lonely. I knew that forcing him to visit Ken would not help, and I couldn't insist any further. During this period, he often came home, smelling of alcohol, late into the night. He claimed it was for business entertainment. But the lipstick marks on his shirts and receipts from hotel stays in his suit pockets suggested he was having an affair. He couldn't make time for his son, yet somehow found time for another woman. I didn't love him anymore, but Ken would feel sad if we divorced. So, I had endured such behavior. Then, Ken's condition worsened further. Called by his doctor to discuss his situation, I was told something devastating. Unfortunately, he only has about a month left. Oh no. Can't we do something about it? There's nothing more we can do. As I broke down in tears, the doctor assured me. We will continue to care for him with all our sincerity until the end. Despite continued treatments and discussions with the doctor over the next half-month, Ken's condition deteriorated as expected. I guess it won't be long now, huh? What are you talking about? There are still so many things you want to do, right? While encouraging him, I cried where he couldn't see me. Eventually, the doctor informed me that continuing treatment was futile. And I decided to bring him home to spend his final days. Can I go home? Yes, the doctor said a change of scenery would be good for a few days. Yay! His voice was weak, but he still responded like the child he was. I fought back tears. I told Sean about bringing Ken home, but he just said, and wandered off somewhere. This man is hopeless. I had completely given up on Sean. The discharge was scheduled for the next evening. I busied myself preparing the house and arranging the discharge. While packing his belongings, he suddenly spoke up. Mom, do you still love Dad? What? Startled by his sudden question, I paused. He continued, seemingly indifferent to my surprise. Dad doesn't really care about me or you, right? So, if you don't love Dad, I want you to divorce and live your life the way you want to. Ken. He had noticed the strained relationship between his parents. But, as a parent, I couldn't let him worry about us in his final moments. I forced a smile and responded quickly. What are you talking about? Of course, I love your father. He cares about us too. He's just too busy to visit, that's all. Don't worry, okay? But. Okay, I see. It seemed he wasn't fully convinced, but he stopped pressing the matter and eventually fell asleep. Relieved, I sighed deeply at his bedside. 2 days later, Ken passed away at home. Sean never showed up until the end, and I stayed by his side, holding his hand until he took his last breath. Ken. Ken. As I recalled everything from the time I got pregnant until now, I clung to his cooling body and cried out loud. The doctor and nurses, who had cared for him since he was a child, came to offer their condolences and explained the next steps. Then, one of the nurses handed me a letter from a bag. This is from Ken. He asked me to give it to you if anything happened. From Ken. With words of thanks, I took the letter. They had been incredibly supportive to me who suffered alone without Sean's help. And to Ken suffering from illness. After they left, I opened the letter beside his body. The contents made me gasp aloud. What is this? In addition to expressing his gratitude, the letter from him contained something shocking. As I read it, anger boiled inside me. As the funeral director came over to arrange the details, My mind was consumed by the contents of his letter. Nevertheless, I had to decide on the specifics for his funeral, ensuring it would be a modest yet warm and homely service in honor of Ken. The day before the funeral, Sean finally showed up, reeking of alcohol as usual. I no longer had the energy to confront him forcefully. Sean, nonchalantly commenting while he grabbed another drink from the fridge, said, "You've aged a lot. Tomorrow is Ken's funeral. Where have you been? I told you, I was at work. What's with all the nagging?" I wondered why I had ever married such a man. But then, without him, I would never have met Ken. My thoughts were a mess. Ken is no longer with us. Oh.
Yeah.
That's right. His indifferent response, as if he had lost a distant relative, made my anger boil over. Yet, I knew arguing with him was pointless, and decided to focus on preparing for the next day's funeral instead. Lucky me. No more child support, let's get a divorce. What? While preparing for the funeral, I was shocked by Sean's sudden statement. I knew he was selfish, but this was beyond belief. There's a woman I want to marry, but she doesn't want kids. So what? As long as Ken was alive, I was drained by child support and medical bills, right?
Ah.
I'm relieved. How awful. I felt a chill run through me. To think this man was Ken's father. My mind was clear, but my insides were boiling. I agree to the divorce. Right? I'll take the house, so get out fast. Just wait until after the funeral. Fine. Saying that, he left somewhere. On the day of the funeral, I read Ken's will. Sean turned pale, and the relatives glared at him like demons. Now is the time to fight back. The will of Ken that I read revealed Sean's infidelity. Until I started reading the will at the funeral. He had been playing the part of a grieving father who had lost his beloved son, wailing loudly. How could such a letter? No, it's not true, it's a prank by Ken. Isn't that right? Monica, I felt bad that I couldn't visit often because of work, but this was too much. He tried to deny it at this point, looking quite disgraceful. I silently took an envelope out of my bag and thrust the photos in front of him. What? You took these pictures secretly. Are the pictures something you'd be troubled by if found out? Like if someone saw this photo of you arm in arm with another woman? No. As he stumbled over his words with a pale face, I smiled and asked the relatives to pass around a few photos. Gasps of shock and words of disgust leaked from everywhere. Despicable. Not visiting his frail son and instead doing this with some woman. The looks directed at him became even harsher, and he collapsed on the spot. To this Sean, I presented the divorce papers. He promptly looked up at me, his voice on the verge of tears as he clung desperately. It was just fun because you weren't there for me due to all the caregiving. Forgive me. I don't want a divorce. You're not a child. How many times did I ask you to help me care for him? I begged you to be there with us, but you always claimed you were too busy with work. Well, nursing is dirty. At that moment, he vanished from before my eyes, and when I realized it, he was crawling on the floor. Next to him stood his father, breathing heavily. What do you mean, dirty? He was your own son. Enough with your nonsense. A parent who won't care for their child is no parent at all. That's the lowest of the low. Sean's parents had always cherished Ken from the moment he was born. They celebrated every homecoming from the hospital with meals out, bought him his favorite things, and never missed a visit. Sean had always excused his absence by claiming he was too busy with work. So perhaps his parents never expected him to be so heartless. Now, with tears streaming down their faces, they glared at him without wiping them away. This might have been the first time he was ever struck, as he sat shocked, holding his cheek. Monica, I'm so terribly sorry for all this. If I had known he was such a harmful man to his own son, I would have urged you to divorce him long ago. I'm truly sorry. As they seemed to apologize forever, I quickly stopped them. They were not to blame. It was because Ken loved them that I didn't divorce. Father, Mother, you've done nothing wrong. Look, Ken even wrote in his letter thanking you both and wishing you well. Ken and I both love you dearly. Monica, thank you. I'm sorry, Ken. As she clung to me and began to sob softly, her husband looked down, tears flowing freely. Across from us, it seemed Sean had finally come to his senses. Suddenly standing up, he pointed at me and shouted. Nonsense. Why are you apologizing to this woman? She's just an old lady who can't even take care of her husband. Sean. You. Eek. As the father-in-law lunged at him again, I stepped in to stop him, positioning myself in front of Sean. Despite his trembling, he tried to maintain some dominance with a glare. What? You got a problem with me? Not really. This is reality. You have no allies here. And make sure to return the money you borrowed from various people, you know. How do you know about that? At my words, the relatives who had lent him money became restless. After reading Ken's letter, I contacted the relatives. It turned out that Sean's activities, which Ken had heard about, were quite expensive. The woman he was involved with loved luxury, enjoying brand-name shopping and overseas trips. He had been paying for all of it, but his salary alone could never cover these expenses. Realizing this, I confirmed with the relatives if anyone had lent money to Sean. Shockingly, it was revealed that not only his relatives, but also my own had lent him money under the guise of Ken's medical expenses. Initially, I had muddied the waters by thanking them and promising repayment. However, given the current situation, the relatives realized that he had been using the money for his affair, not for Ken. Don't mess with us. We lent you that thinking it was for Ken. Give me back the $10,000 now. And me, too. Return the $20,000. Following these outbursts, demands for repayment erupted from various corners. Sean, looking around at the voices, turned pale. Then, he turned to me with a forced smile. Monica, we're married, right? You'll help me out, won't you? What? What are you talking about? You didn't help with caregiving. You didn't contribute to treatment costs or even household expenses. And on top of that, you borrowed from everyone for your own selfish desires. Unbelievable. Why would I help you? Don't say things like that. With a pitiful voice, he collapsed back onto the floor. It seemed he no longer had the energy to argue. As I looked down at him, ready to deliver the final blow, I called out to the entrance. Yasmin, please come in. Yasmin? Why are you here? His face looked as if he might blow bubbles and collapse any second as he stared toward the entrance. The woman called Yasmin approached me hesitantly. Her simple makeup was a stark contrast to the pictures. I invited her. On Ken's last day, she was with you, wasn't she? I thought it would be good if she could also attend the funeral. Oh. About this. It's fine, don't bother with formalities. At my words, Yasmin clenched her mouth shut. Her complexion was as pale as Sean's. I handed her a document when she reached me. I called you here today to have you sign this. Please read it carefully and sign. What, $50,000? I can't pay that, it's impossible. Whether you can pay is not for you to decide. Yasmin looked at me with pleading eyes as she said, but I was annoyed by her gesture. But I didn't intend to snap at her for that. Suddenly, Sean, trembling, stepped between me and Yasmin. What? It's my fault. Please forgive Yasmin. It's cruel to demand such a sum from her. Why? I'm merely asking for compensation for the affair. He raised his eyebrows at my words and sighed heavily. I mentally shouted that I wanted to make that gesture myself, waiting for his next words. Listen. Yasmin is frail, unlike you. How do you expect her to make $50,000? Through her body. What a terrible person you are. Sean. Yasmin clung to his back, looking blissful, while Sean basked in the moment. I wasn't the only one watching the two with a cold gaze. Even if I stayed silent, the relatives would likely tear them apart. But I decided to add a bit more fuel to the fire and opened my mouth. Your son is hospitalized, isn't he? Son. Yasmin flinched noticeably. I continued unabated. He's the same age as Ken, 12 years old. I heard he's been in the hospital continuously. Your ex-husband took custody, right? It must be tough with the hospital bills, treatment costs, and bed fees. I imagine you're being billed quite a bit on top of child support. How do you know that? Yasmin looked at me as if I were some sort of ghost. Sean was frozen in shock. I pulled out some documents from my bag and handed them to him. After trembling, he pushed her away from him. What is this? Divorced? With a child? You didn't tell me. You said you needed the money for your family living far away, didn't you? I didn't lie. My son is part of my family too. Was I dating a used-up woman? What about true love? Were you just after my money? You were only interested in my body too. She retorted and threw her shoe at him. Enraged, he grabbed her, and the two began scuffling like children. Thankfully, a security guard called by someone managed to restrain them. I approached the now disheveled pair with a smile and spoke. Sean, make sure to sign the divorce papers and arrange for the payment of the compensation. Yasmin, I won't cut even a penny from your compensation. Also, a message from your ex-husband. He says infidelity seems to be a sickness you can't cure. It seems you've been seeing several people, but if you have that much spare time, then you'll also be paying for the compensation, unpaid child support, and medical bills, through enforcement. No, that can't be. They were led away by security. Sean hung his head wordlessly, and Yasmin's shoulders slumped. I apologized to each family member for the disturbance. And they all responded with kindness, which brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, the divorce was finalized. And we agreed on the amount of property division and compensation I had requested. The incident enraged both my in-laws and the rest of the family, who had been deceived, creating a situation where everyone ostracized Sean. Apparently, he had borrowed money from shady sources to pay back what he owed. And now, he is working several different part-time jobs. However, overwhelmed by repayments that left him without enough for living expenses. Last month he was taken away by some frightening individuals due to his inability to keep up with the interest payments. As his parents have no intention of filing a missing persons report, I hope only for his safety. But I also wish he would experience unimaginable suffering for his actions. As for Yasmin, once it was revealed to all her boyfriends that she had cheated, and that she had a child, all financial support was cut off. At 30, considered too old for the nightlife industry, she struggled to attract clients. And eventually had to rely on her parents, who paid the compensation money in full. She was then sent to work on a farm on some island, where all her earnings go directly to her parents as repayment. As for me, I moved with Ken's pictures to a house near the sea he always wanted to see. And adopted a cat he had wanted. Now, I live there alone. Occasionally, my in-laws come and we enjoy reminiscing about Ken, which has become one of my joys. After his death, I received another letter from him. It was filled with gratitude, apologies for leaving for heaven first, and his wish to be my child again in another life, written in slightly smudged handwriting. The letter ended with, "Mom, stay true to yourself and live a long, healthy life." It inspired me to live life in my own way, for his sake as well. Overcoming the sadness of not being able to see my beloved child grow up. I will live each day to the fullest.